If there are any further questions about this about the
Da,
subject
ako
of
ima
typology,
pitanja, možemo uzeti par pitanja, da. Ako ste razmišljali toku pauze.
if not, we will move to the book of Hebrews.
Ako nema pitanja, onda ćemo ići na Jevrejima poslanicu.
But I want to make sure that there are not some lingering issues in your mind.
Ali želim da budem siguran da nema tu nekih zalutalih ideja koje kasne u umu, odnosno pitanja koje nisu razrešene do sad. Znači sve je jasno.
Okay. We have mentioned Hebrews several times already today.
Spomenuli smo Jevrejima već danas nekoliko puta tu poslanicu.
But now I wish to go there to the book of Hebrews to deal with an issue that arises when we talk about typology.
Ali hoću da idem i još dalje u tipologiju Jevrejima poslanicu. Još neki problemi.
I already gave this illustration of my friend at Andrews University that saw the contradiction between Hebrews and Leviticus.
Pričao sam vam priču mom prijatelju sa Andrewsa koji je video protivurečnost između 3. Mojsijeve i Jevrejima.
And the main contradiction is
glavna protivurečnost
found in the center part of the book of Hebrews.
Je u centralnom delu knjige Jevrejima poslanice.
You remember on Sunday we talked about Albion Ballinger.
Sećate se da smo u nedelju govorili o Ballingeru.
And Ballinger's key text was Hebrews 6, 19 and 20.
A njegov ključni tekst je bio Jevrejima 6, 19 i 20.
And Ballinger read this text and saw that, at least in his interpretation, Jesus went within the second veil into the most holy place.
Dakle, Ballinger je čitao ovaj tekst i prema njegovom tumačenju Isus je ušao iza najdalje zavese, u svetinju nad svetinjama.
This was at the ascension, when he went back to heaven.
To je bilo kad se vaznao na nebo.
First century.
Prvi vek.
And Ballinger asked himself, when did the high priest go into the most holy place in the Old Testament?
A onda se Ballinger pitao, a kad to sveštenik ide u najsvetije mesto, svetinju nad svetinjama?
Well, what was the answer? What's the logical answer to that?
Koji je logičan odgovor?
Yom Kippur, that's right, Day of Atonement.
Tačno, dan pomirenja.
And so Ballinger came to the conclusion
Ballinger je došao do zaključka
that the Day of Atonement started at the ascension.
Da je dan pomirenja počeo kad se Isus vazneo.
And when Jesus went back to heaven, he already started the Day of Atonement.
I kad se vazneo, onda je već počeo dan pomirenja.
So what was there left for 1844?
Šta je onda ostalo od 1844?
For him, not very much.
Za njega ne puno.
And so he's arguing that Hebrews changes the typology of
Njegov argument je u stvari da
sanctuary.
Jevrejima menja tu tipologiju o svetinji.
In Leviticus, the
U 3.
Day of
Mojsijevoj
Atonement came at the end of the year.
dan pomirenja je došao na kraju godine.
And now Hebrews is saying,
A sad Jevrejima
when Jesus went back to heaven,
kaže kad se Isus vaznao na nebo,
Day of Atonement is already starting.
dan pomirenja je već počeo.
Desmond Ford
Desmond Ford
had as his key text
ima ključni tekst,
in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 9
9. glava Jevrejima,
and verse 12.
12. stih.
And let's read that text here.
Da i pročitamo taj tekst.
Not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, he entered the sanctuary once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. Who will read that for us in
Ko će da
Serbian?
čita u srpskom prevodu?
Nine-
Luka,
9:12.
dignite ruku ko hoće čita. Goran, izvoli.
Ni s krvlju jarčijom, niti telećom, nego kroz svoju krv uđe jednom u svetinju i nađe večni otkup.
Now it says he entered, and according to the Serbian translation, he entered into the sanctuary, or does it say most holy place?
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary, okay. So in our English versions, my
U
version
engleskoj
says
verziji kaže
he entered into the most holy place.
uđe jednom u svetinju nad svetinjama.
And so we have to deal with an additional struggle that you don't have to deal with here in
Mi imamo
your
muke dodatne
translation.
koje vi nemate.
The word here is tahagija.
Jer reč je tahagija.
And Des Ford argues
Ford je
that
razmišljao
this term refers to the most holy place.
da je ovo svetinja nad
This is
svetinjama.
what some of our English versions say.
Jer neki engleski prevodi to i kažu.
So here we have Jesus entering into the most holy place,
Isus ušao u najsvetije mesto, svetinju nad svetinjama,
and his blood is compared to the blood of the goats and the calves in the Old
a krv je
Testament.
upoređena sa krvlju, jarčijom i telećem u Starom Zavetu.
And when was the blood of the goats and the calves taken into the
A
most holy
kad
place?
je jarčija i teleća krv bila prinošena?
Yom Kippur. And so Desmond Ford says,
Desmond Ford onda
when
kaže,
Jesus went back to heaven, he started Yom Kippur.
kad se vratio na nebo, Isus je počeo Jom Kipur.
So there's nothing left for 1844.
Nema 1864.
This is an invention of Adventists reading something into Hebrews that's not
To je
there.
izmišljotina adventistička učitana u Jevrejima poslanicu.
Why don't I take care of this one first, because this is
Ajde.
not a problem for your translation, but I think I should explain it to you.
Ajde prvo da rešimo ovaj problem s prevodom, tahagija, ovaj problem, to nije problem s našim prevodom.
What does tahagija mean?
Šta znači tahagija?
This just shows me that the Serbian translators were much more clever and careful than our American English
Pokazuje da je
translators.
da su srpski prevodioci bili mudriji od američkih.
It shows that the Serbian biblical scholars are superior to the American biblical
Tako da
scholars.
su srpski biblijski teolozi superiorniji u odnosu na američki.
Because your language is the heavenly language, it's much closer to the...
Jer je vaš jezik nebeski, bliži je.
Okay, we could go on that line, but... remember, I mentioned last hour that the book of Hebrews is quoting from the Septuagint.
Sećate se da sam spomenuo da Jevrejima citira Septuagintu.
The language that it uses regarding the sanctuary is Septuagint language.
Jezik koji koriste je jezik Septuaginte.
And so the crucial question is, what does tahagija mean in the Septuagint?
Ključno pitanje je šta tahagija znači u Septuaginti?
It's used 109 times in the Septuagint
109 puta se spominje u Septuaginti ovaj izraz.
with reference to the sanctuary.
Naravno, odnosi se na svetinju.
First of all, what does this literally mean?
Šta ovo doslovno znači prvo?
Is it singular or plural?
Da li je to jednina ili množina? Singular, dajte se.
Well, it's actually a neuter plural.
To je u stvari množina, ali srednjeg roda.
It has a form that looks similar to the singular, but it's a neuter plural, which means the holy.
Slično je jednini, ali je ipak množina srednjeg roda.
The holy places, if you please.
To znači sveta mesta, svetinje.
It's not a singular.
To nije jednina.
And in the 109 times that it appears in the Septuagint,
109 puta koliko se spominje u Septuaginti,
never, not
Nikada.
one time does it
Nijednom.
refer to the most holy place alone.
ni jednom se ne odnosi samo na svetinju nad svetinjama. I na nju isključivo.
106 times
106 puta
it refers to the whole sanctuary.
odnosi se na celu svetinju.
It's just the general term for sanctuary,
Opšti izraz za svetinju.
just like your Serbian translation.
Kao što kaže srpski prevod.
3 times it seems to have reference to the holy place by itself.
3 puta izgleda da se odnosi samo na svetinju, ono prvo odeljenje.
But never to the most holy place by itself.
Ali nikada na svetinju nad svetinjama samo za sebe.
One of my students at the sanctuary class heard me lecture on tahagija.
Jedan od mojih studenata na času svetinje čuo me da predajemo tahagi.
And my wife often gives seminars at weekends. She gives women's retreats around the country in the United
A
States.
moja žena ima seminare za žene, za službu žena, dakle često po Americi.
And sometimes I go with her,
Nekad idem s njom.
but I'm not welcome in the women's retreat.
Nisam dobrodošao na tom ženskom društvu.
And so I stay in the room and use my Bible works and study the Bible
Ja
during that
ostanem u
weekend.
sobi i proučavam Bibliju, uzmem Bible Works.
And one weekend, I spent the entire weekend looking up every use of tahagija in the
Jedan
Septuagint.
vikend sam proveo ceo, samo tahagiju sam tražio.
And I came to this same conclusion that never does it refer to the most holy place.
I isti zaključak, sam došao do istog zaključka. Nikad se ne odnosi samo na
But this
svetinju nad
was only a weekend survey of the Bible. It was not a detailed technical study.
Ali to je bio samo pregled vikenda, dakle, nije to bilo detaljno.
So one of my seminary students decided to write his master's thesis on this question.
I jedan od mojih studenata na teologiji odlučio da napiše
And he
magistrat
wrote this thesis at a Baptist seminary,
napisao je na baptističkom
Grace
fakultetu.
Theological Seminary.
Grace, blagodatni baptistički, ali Grace, ne prevodi se ime.
And he went through every passage in the Septuagint and came to the same conclusion that I did.
Svaki odlomak gde se spominjala ta hagija je proučavao i došao do istog zaključka do kog
He
je.
also went through all the pseudepigrapha, all of
Išao je kroz sve pseudoepigrafe isto.
the extra biblical writings in the time of the first century.
Van biblijske spise prvog veka.
He went through all of Josephus' use of tahagija.
Otišao je Josifa Flavija i
He went through
upotrebu
all of
tahagije.
Philo's use of
Filonovu upotrebu tahagije.
all the Greek sources that we
Sve
have
grčke izvore koje
from
imamo
the time of Paul.
iz Pavlovog vremena.
And he found that never in any of those sources
I
does
našao je da nigde, ni u jednom
tahagija
od tih izvora,
refer to the most holy place.
nigde nije tahagija svetinja nad svetinjama.
So if anyone from America comes to you and tries to tell you your translation is wrong,
Ako neko iz Amerike dođe i kaže vaš prevod ne valja,
and that Paul is saying, Hebrews is saying here that Jesus enters into the most holy
i
place,
da je Pavle ušao u svetinju nad svetinjama i kaže vam da je Pavle ušao u svetinju nad svetinjama,
you can just tell them
ne Pavle
that
nego Isus.
your Serbian scholars have done more careful homework than our American translators.
Dakle,
So,
srpski teolozi su bolji posao napravili nego Amerikanci. A inače i Pavle bio tamo, znate, bio do trećeg neba.
like Day of Atonement language.
To je ipak jezik dana pomirenja, zvuči kao taj jezik.
Okay, what is the solution to this problem?
Šta je rešenje za ovaj problem?
Does the author of Hebrews change the typology from the book of Leviticus?
Da li je autor Jevrejima stvarno promenio onu treću Mojsiju, dakle,
Does it have Jesus already starting the Day of Atonement when he went back to heaven?
da li Isus stvarno otpočeo odmah dan pomirenja kad se vratio na nebo?
Let's look more closely.
Da malo to pobliže osvetlimo.
And I first invite you to take your handout
Uzmite papir, dakle, koji sam...
and look at page 9.
Pogledajte 9. stranicu. 9. strana.
My colleague Dr. Shea has analyzed this middle section of Hebrews and shown that
Dr.
this is
Shea
in a chiastic structure.
je analizirao ovaj središnji deo Jevrejima, došao do zaključka da je ovo u hijastičkoj strukturi.
You see that 6, 19, and 20 describes the veil.
6.19 govori o zavesi,
And then over here in 10,
a u 10. glavi 19.20
we also have the veil
isto imamo zavesu
and entering into the veil.
i ulazak iza zavese.
Entering through the veil, I should say.
Ili kroz zavesu.
And the veil and entering.
Ulazak iza zavese u oba teksta.
And most scholars, I haven't found anyone that has disagreed with this, that 6, 19, and 20 is describing the same thing as 10, 19, and 20.
Većina teologa kaže da, to je to. U ova dva odlomka ista ideja.
These match in chiastic parallel members.
Podudarni u hijastičkoj strukturi.
And then the top of the chiasm is right here where Hebrews 9:12 is, that
Vrh
section.
hijazma je Jevrejima 9.12. Dakle, to je centralni.
Focusing upon the heavenly sanctuary.
Fokus je na nebeskoj svetinji.
But I would like to suggest that the key to understanding what's going on in Hebrews is in seeing the parallel between these two veil passages.
Ali ključ za rješavanje problema je dakle u podudarnosti ova dva odlomka iza zavese.
But let's start first with this one, 6:19 and
Ajde
20.
počnemo sa prvim. 6:19.
Now, you studied this passage in the Sabbath school lesson this last quarter.
Prošlog u subotnoj školi ste proučavali taj tekst.
And the author there argued that the veil that's described in chapter 6 could be the first veil into the first apartment.
I oni koji su čitali mogli su da shvate da autor rekao da to može biti prva zavesa, ulazak u prvo odeljenje.
And it's true that the word for veil, katapetasma in Greek,
A istina je da zavese, dakle reč za zavesu u katapetasma u grčkom,
this can refer to all the veils. It can refer to the court veil, it can refer to the veil into the first apartment, and it can refer to the veil into the second apartment.
može se odnositi na sve zavese, u svim odeljenjima, i dvorištu, i prvom i drugom odeljenju.
However, this doesn't have not only the word veil, but it has the phrase within the veil.
Ali ovdje nema samo reč zavese, nego fraza iza zavese.
And when you go back to the Septuagint, use of that phrase,
I kada odete u Septuagintu i nađete ovu frazu,
it almost always refers to the second veil,
skoro uvek se odnosi na onu najdalju zavesu.
the veil into the most holy place.
Ulazak u svetinju nad svetinjama.
There's one possible exception,
Postoji samo jedan izuzetak,
but most generally it refers to the veil into the most holy place.
ali u najvećem broju slučajeva to je ulazak iza najdalje zavese.
Now let's see. What is your name here?
Kako je tvoje ime?
What is it?
Nevena.
Navena. Okay, Navena. You studied this for your project, I think, and did
Ti
you
si ovo
come?
proučavala.
You probably came to the conclusion that this was the veil into the most holy place. Did you?
I došla si do zaključka da je ova zavesa iza najdalje, da je ovo najdalja zavesa.
And I think that's probably the fair conclusion to come to.
I to je fair zaključak.
I think the other is a possibility.
Postoji mogućnost,
What our Sabbath School Quarterly argued for is a
ono što
possibility.
kaže subotna škola, dakle,
But to me,
Pouka.
the weight of evidence supports the conclusion that you came to.
ali ipak kad izvagate dokaze, ono do čega si ti došla je logičnije.
And I have tried to see if there's another way to solve the problem than to come to that conclusion, and I haven't seen another way.
I ja sam probao da rešim ovo na drugi način nego da dođem do tog zaključka, ali nema drugog načina.
And so I'm willing to say probably this is the second veil.
I mogu da kažem, najverovatnije to je druga zavesa.
It's not for sure, but probably.
Ne sigurno, ali najverovatnije.
But I have come to realize that it doesn't matter which veil it is,
Ali ja sam shvatio da u stvari nema veze koja je to zavesa.
because Ballinger
Jer Ballinger
missed the point in this text.
je promašio glavnu poentu teksta.
He forgot that there was one more time besides the Day of Atonement when the most holy place was entered.
On je zaboravio da je postojalo još jedno vreme kad se ulazilo u svetinju nad svetinjama, a nije na dan pomirenja.
When was that one other time?
Kad je to bilo? Još samo jednom.
It's described in Exodus chapter 40.
To je u 2. Mojsijevoj 40. glavi. Inauguration?
That's right, the inauguration of the
Dedication.
sanctuary. The dedication or inauguration of the sanctuary. Now in Exodus 40, the high priest Aaron had not yet been anointed,
U 2. Mojsijevoj 40. Aron nije još pomazan,
and so Moses functioned in the priestly function.
tako je Mojsije igrao i svešteničku ulogu.
And Moses went into the sanctuary, the holy place, and the most holy place.
I Mojsije ušao u svetinju, ali i u svetinju nad svetinjama.
And he anointed all of the furniture in all of the
I
sanctuary.
pomazao je uljem sav nameštaj u svetinju.
And then the services could start functioning.
I onda je počela služba.
So the question is, which
Pitanje,
event is Hebrews 6:19 and 20 talking about?
Sad je pitanje, o kom događaju govori Jevrejima 6, 19 i 20?
Is it speaking about the inauguration or dedication of the sanctuary?
Govori li ovaj tekst o inauguraciji i posvećenju svetinje
Or is it speaking about the Day of Atonement?
ili o danu pomirenja?
I don't think you can decide from Hebrews 6
Ne verujem da uopšte to možete pronaći u Jevrejima 6,
because he simply doesn't say.
jer ne kaže.
That's why I believe it's so important we see the parallel, chiastic parallel with Hebrews 10.
Zato je važno da u hijazmu vidimo paralelu sa 10. glavom.
And this is the study that Ballinger did not do.
A to nije Ballinger uradio.
He did not see the parallel with the text that actually tells you
Ballinger to nije video.
the event that is being described in Hebrews 6.
Ono što je opisano u 6. glavi, paralela s 10. on to nije video.
Let's look at Hebrews 10:19 and 20.
19. i 20. stih 10. glave.
Therefore, brothers, having boldness to enter the tahagia.
Imajući dakle slobodu, braću, ulaziti u svetinju.
Here it is again, the whole sanctuary that's
Cela
being
svetinja.
emphasized. By the blood of Jesus.
Krvlju Isusa Hrista.
By a new and living way which he has what for us?
Putem novim i živim koji nam je šta za nas?
The Greek here is en kai. No, I wrote it wrong. G and then the K. You spell it, when you transliterate it, you write it one way, and when you write it in Greek, you write it another way with the N. So,
Double gamma is
yeah, it's an egg kainizo,
Enkainizo.
but you pronounce it en kainizo.
Enkainizo. Znate već taj ispred K, jel?
That's the word that's used here for what Jesus did when he went into the sanctuary.
To je glagol koji se koristi za obnovio. Znači,
New and living way which he enkainizod for us.
Obnovio je enkainizo.
Now this word can have several meanings in Greek.
Ova reč ima nekoliko značenja u
It
grčkom.
can mean opened,
Može značiti
or
otvorio.
it can mean, like I think you have it in your translation, renewed.
Mi imamo obnovio.
How do we know? What is the translation that is preferred here?
Kako mi znamo koji je prevod ovde?
Remember, he's using Septuagint language in
Setite se,
Hebrews.
koristi Septuagint.
So you
jezik
go back
Septuagint.
to the Septuagint
Znači odemo u Septuagintu.
and see, does this term appear in the sanctuary
Da li
descriptions of
se
the
koristi
Septuagint?
u Septuaginti za svetinju, jezik svetinje?
The answer is yes.
I odgovor je da.
Where?
Gde?
Is it in Leviticus 16?
Da li u 3. Mojsiju 16?
Day of Atonement?
Dan pomirenja?
No.
Ne.
Is it in inauguration?
Nego inauguraciji.
Da.
Yes.
In fact, it's only occurring in
To je
one chapter in the
Samo u
whole
jednoj
Pentateuch.
glavi se spominje u celom petoknjižju.
And that chapter is Numbers chapter 7.
A to je 4. Mojsijeva 7. glava.
And that whole chapter is dealing with the dedication or inauguration of the sanctuary.
A cela glava je u stvari posvećenje svetinje, inauguracija, posvećenje svetinje.
And you find forms of this word in
Oblike ove reči pronalazimo i u
verse 10,
stihu 10.
verse 11,
i
verse
11.
84, and
84.
verse 88.
88. To je sve u 7. glavi.
Therefore, according
Stoga-
to Hebrews 10,
Prema Jevrejima 10,
the occasion for Christ's entering into the sanctuary is not the Day of Atonement.
događaj nije dakle dan pomirenja koji je tu opisan.
It is the time when he enkainizos the sanctuary,
Nego je vreme kad je on enkainizo svetinju.
when he inaugurates, when he dedicates. the
Kad je
sanctuary.
inaugurisao sve, kad je posvetio svetinju.
Now, just to make sure we don't misunderstand that,
Da budemo sigurni da nismo pogrešno ovo razumeli,
and even if you didn't know that he was using the Septuagint,
čak i ako ne znamo da je koristio Septuagintu,
there is an inner control within the book of Hebrews.
Postoji i unutrašnja kontrola u samoj knjizi Jevrejima.
Because the word enkainizo is only used one other time in the book of Hebrews.
Jer u Jevrejima ta reč se koristi samo još jednom.
And it's in chapter 9 and verse 18.
A to je u 9:18.
This is describing Moses' inauguration of the old covenant, his dedication of the covenant.
Opisana je inauguracija ili potvrda, posvećenje zaveta, Mojsijeva
And
potvrda.
it says here, not even the first covenant was enkainizod without blood.
Jer ni prvi nije utvrđen, to je enkainizo.
It's clearly talking about the time of the inauguration, not the time of the Day of Atonement.
Jasno govori ovdje o inauguraciji tog zaveta, a ne o danu pomirenja.
So just as Moses inaugurated the first covenant, and that involved, as we read in the later verses, it involved sprinkling the whole sanctuary.
Kao što je Mojsije ovdje inaugurisao taj zavet i kropio je čak i svetinju,
You see that in verse 21.
u 21. stihu
Then
skinio je kropija,
Then likewise he sprinkled with blood all the tabernacle and all the vessels of ministry.
tako i skinio i sve sudove službene pokropi krvlju.
So the comparison here is between Moses inaugurating the earthly sanctuary and Christ inaugurating the heavenly sanctuary.
I evo paralela između Mojsija koji je inaugurisao zemaljsku svetinju i Hrista koji je
Do you see
inaugurisao
that parallel?
nebesku svetinju.
Is that coming clear to you?
Da li vam je jasna ta paralela?
The key term is this term enkainizo.
Ključni izraz enkainizo.
Now let's go to Hebrews 9 and verse 12.
A sad idemo u Jevrejima 9:12.
Not with the blood of goats and calves.
Kaže, ni s krvlju jačim niti telećem.
The word for goat
Reč
here
za
is tragos.
jarca ovde je tragos,
The word for calf is chimeros.
a za tele je himeros. Isn't that moskos?
Yes, you're right. Thank you for sparing me from a fate worse than death. This should be down here.
Ja sam malo pomogao da se sećam, juče smo ceo dan predavao, pa himeros je dakle,
This I meant to write here, and this one to write here. Moskos.
ja sam uzimao ovaj predmet.
It
kad
helps
sam
to
bio na
have you
engleskom, se
translate
sećam.
yesterday from me, so you have a better memory than I do here.
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Moskos je tele, dakle, ovo što kaže... Himeros će sada objasniti.
I apologize. Don't worry about
Izvinjavam
chimeros.
se oko himerosa.
This is goats, this is calves.
Moskos su telad, kavs, ja? A tragos je jarac.
These are the two words that are found in Hebrews
To
9:12.
su reči dve u Jevrejima 9.
Now let's start with the word moskos.
Da recimo počnemo sa moskos.
We go back to the Old Testament, again to the Septuagint.
Idemo opet u Septuagintu, Stari Zavet.
When were the moskos offered?
Kad se prinosio moskos, tele?
Was there a moskos offered at the Day of Atonement?
Da li se prinosio za dan pomirenja?
Yes. there
Da,
was.
da, prinosio
Was
se.
there a moskos offered at the inauguration?
Da li se moskos prinosio na inauguraciji svetinje?
Yes.
Da.
You find it in Numbers 7 and you find it in Leviticus 16.
Nalazi se to u 4. Mojsiju 7 i u 3. Mojsiju 16.
What about the word for goats?
A šta da kažemo o reči za jarac?
In the Septuagint there are two words for goats.
U Septuaginti imamo dve reči za jarac.
One, tragos,
Tragos je jedna,
and another one, chimeros.
a druga je himeros.
Which one is used in Leviticus 16?
Koja je od ove dve reči u 3. Mojsijevoj 16 upotrebljena?
Is tragos used in
Da
Leviticus
li je
16
tragos
for the Day of Atonement?
za dan pomirenja ili himeros?
No, tragos does not appear in Leviticus 16.
Tragos ne pronalazite u 3. Mojsijevoj 16.
It is chimeros that appears in
To je
Leviticus
himeros u
16.
3. Mojsijevoj 16.
And this word is not used by the book of Hebrews.
I tu reč Jevrejima poslanica ne koristi, himeros,
It uses the word tragos.
nego koristi reč tragos.
Where do we find tragos in the Septuagint
Gde
Pentateuch?
pronalazimo tragos u Septuagintskom petoknjižju?
in the description of the sanctuary services.
U opisu svetinje, službe u svetinji.
Only one time.
Samo jedno.
Well, I should say only one chapter.
Samo jedno poglavlje ga spominje.
Can you guess which one?
Pogađate koje je?
Numbers chapter 7.
4. Mojsijeva 7. glava.
13 times in Numbers
13
chapter
puta
7.
se spominje.
Tragos, tragos, tragos.
Tragos,
13.
tragos, tragos. 4. Mojsijeva 7.
So, which one of the two services is Hebrew 9:12 focusing
O
on?
kojoj onda službi govori Jevrejima 9.12?
If you just read on the surface, like apparently Des Ford did,
Ako čitate po površini kako je Ford čitao,
you read goats and you think Day of Atonement.
čitate jarac i mislite, dan pomirenja.
But if you go deeper
Ako idete dublje,
and look at the Greek words that are involved,
uporedite grčke reči,
you find that the author of Hebrews is very careful to steer you away from the Day of Atonement.
i pokazuje vam da je autor Jevrejima svesno čitaoce odvlačio od dana pomirenja. Da to nije dan pomirenja.
And I can't help believe that God superintended that this word tragos would only be found in one chapter in the whole Pentateuch.
Meni je čudesno da je Bog sačuvao reč tragos samo u jednoj glavi Petoknjižja.
So that when the author of the epistle to Hebrews points to that word,
Tako da kad Jevrejima poslanica spominje tu reč,
there can be no question but what he is referring to the inauguration
nema dileme više da je reč o
and
inauguraciji,
not to the Day of Atonement.
a ne o danu pomirenja.
Are you catching the point that I'm making here?
Ste uhvatili poentu ovu?
To me, I think it's a very powerful confirmation of what we have taught as Seventh-day Adventists.
Ovo je moćni dokaz za ono što učimo mi kao adventisti.
Now, just in case you don't know that he's using the Septuagint,
Dakle, opet u slučaju da ne znate da on služi se
God has
Septuagintom,
given an internal indicator of this also in the book of Hebrews.
Bog im je dao unutrašnje svedočanstvo i za ovo u Jevrejima
Chapter
poslanici.
9 and verse 19.
9:19.
For when Moses, and here this is the context of the inauguration again.
Opet je kontekst inauguracije, 19.
When Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats.
Jer kad Mojsije izgovori sve zapovesti po zakonu svemu narodu, onda uze krvi jarčije i teleće.
The exact same two terms here again.
Ista dva termina, ponovno.
And it says he took the blood of these animals,
Uzeo je krv tih životinja,
sprinkled on the book, sprinkled on the people,
pokropio knjigu i narod,
and then in verse 21 he took this same blood that the Greek implies it's the same blood of the calves and the goats,
ista krv, grčki podrazumeva istu krv u 21.
and he
stihu,
sprinkled it on the
i
sanctuary,
pokropio je skiniju,
inaugurating it, dedicating it.
svetinju, posvetio je.
So the term goats and calves in the epistle to Hebrew clearly points to inauguration and not to Day of Atonement.
Jarčija, dakle i teleća krv, jasno ukazuje na inauguraciju, a ne na dan pomirenja.
So what happened when Jesus went back to heaven?
Šta se onda dogodilo kad se Isus vazneo na nebo?
He started up the sanctuary services up there
Otpočeo je svešteničku službu.
in fulfillment of the prophecy of Daniel 9.
Kao ispunjenje Danila 9.
Let's look at Daniel 9 and verse 24.
Da pogledamo Danilo 9:24.
Daniel 9 verse 24 describes the 70 weeks that are determined upon God's people, the Jewish people,
Opisano je 70 nedelja određeno tvome narodu, jevrijskom narodu.
and mentions the 6 things that will happen before the end of those 70
Šest
weeks.
stvari će se ispuniti pre završetka ovog perioda.
And what is the last thing that is the angel mentions
I koju posljednju stvar anđeo spominje?
that will happen before AD 34?
Ovo je bilo pre,
To anoint the most holy.
da se pomaže sveti nad svetima.
Now, does your version say most holy place or most holy? Only most holy.
Just most holy, even referring, to person.
Okay. Does it have to be a person there?
Well, yeah.
Does it?
It has, yeah.
Okay.
Ja sam rekao da kod nas ipak ličnost uključuje, da je reč o ličnosti, jer ne bismo rekli svetinju nad svetinjama tim jezikom, nego sveti nad svetinjama.
The term in the Hebrew is just most holy, does not refer to person or to place.
Izraz u Jevrejima je neutralnog karaktera.
And my colleague Dr. Shea,
Sveto nad svetim. Znači,
my colleague Dr. Shea has looked at all of these places where this term appears for most holy, Kodesh Kodeshim.
i moj kolega dr. Še potražio taj izraz Kodesh Kodeshim u Starom Zavetu gdje se sve spominje.
And it doesn't refer to persons, it refers to a place.
I ne odnosi se na osobu, nego na mesto.
And so I think the most probable translation here is that he is going to anoint, not a person, but to anoint the most holy place.
Ovdje nije reč o osobi, ovdje je reč o pomazanju svetinje nad svetinjama. Dakle, mestu.
This is the fulfillment of, this is the antitype of Exodus chapter 40.
To je antitip, ispunjenje 2. Mojsijeve 40. glave.
So what we see in the book of Hebrews is two covenants.
Tako da vidimo dva zaveta.
The old covenant, the Sinaitic covenant,
Stari zavet, Mojsijev,
with its sanctuary.
sa svojom svetinjom.
And this whole covenant is a shadow, it's a type pointing
Ceo
forward
zavet je ukazivao napred.
to the
Dakle,
new covenant
na novi zavet.
and its sanctuary,
I na tu svetinju,
which is the heavenly sanctuary.
koja je nebeska svetinja.
And when Christ ratifies the new covenant by his blood,
I kada je Isus ratifikovao novi zavet svojom krvlju, potvrdio,
then he ascends to the heavenly sanctuary
onda se vazne u nebesku svetinju
to officially start up its services,
da
to
zvanično
inaugurate its
otpočne
services.
svoju službu gore.
When we read in the epistle of the Hebrews about the work that Jesus is doing in the heavenly sanctuary in the first century,
Kad čitam u Jevrejima poslanici o delu Hristovom prvom veka,
do we read Day of Atonement work that he's doing?
da li je to delo dana pomirenja? Ne.
We read about holy place ministry that he is doing.
Mi čitamo o njegovoj službi u svetom mestu, dakle u prvom odeljenju.
Hebrews chapter 7
7. glava Jevrejima,
and verse 25.
25.
And not that he should offer himself, I'm sorry, I'm reading 9. Hebrews 7, verse 25. Therefore he is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him. He ever lives to make intercession for them.
Zato i može vavek spasiti one koji kroz njen dolaze k Bogu. Kad svakda živi, da se može moliti, kod njih kaže posredovati.
What is he ever living to do there in the first century?
Zašto on svakda živi tu u prvom veku? Šta je činio?
Intercessory ministry.
Posrednička služba.
This was the tamid, the daily ministry.
To je bila tamid, dnevna služba.
Not the special day of atonement ministry.
Ne dan pomirenja, taj specijalni dan.
Well, does that mean there is no day of atonement language in Hebrews?
Da li je to jasno da u Jevrejima uopšte nema jezika dana pomirenja onda?
Oh, yes, there is.
Postoji taj jezik.
In fact, it's in chapter 9,
U 9. glavi,
pointing toward the future.
ukazujući na
He
budućnost,
does point to a judgment that will come.
ukazuje na sud koji će doći.
Verse 27.
27. stih.
As it is appointed once for men to die, but after this the judgment.
I kao što je ljudima određeno jednom umreti, a potom sud,
9:27. So the judgment is still future from his day.
sud je budućnost, vidite, od
But
ovog
to
vremena.
me the most insightful passage is Hebrews chapter 10.
Ali za mene Jevrejima 10 je prilično upečatljiv.
And verse 25.
Tekst 25. stih.
Could someone read that for us?
Neko bi mogao to da pročita ako je otvori.
10:25.
10.25.
Okay, here.
Ne ostavljajući skupštine svoje, kao što neki imaju običaj, nego jedan drugoga svetujući i toliko većima koliko vidite da se približuje dan sudnji.
All right, we often use this text to encourage people to come to church,
Obično koristimo ovaj tekst da ohrabrimo ljude da dođu u crkvu.
and that's okay.
To je u redu.
But let's realize the deeper context of this verse.
Ali da shvatimo jedan malo dublji kontekst ovog stiha.
So much the more as you see the day approaching.
Toliko se spominje ovaj izraz dan koji se približava.
In the first century, this term, the day, had a technical meaning.
U prvom veku to je bio jedan tehnički izraz, dan.
We can look at the Jewish Mishnah
možemo pogledati u jevrejskoj mišni,
which records an eyewitness account of what was happening in the sanctuary in the first century.
koja govori o očevicima koji su bili u hramu u prvom veku.
And the Mishnah has 63 chapters.
A mišna ima 63 glave.
And one of the chapters is called The Day.
I jedan od poglavlja se zove dan, taj dan ili dan.
And what does it refer to?
Na što se odnosi?
The Day of Atonement.
Na dan pomirenja.
And so it is possible
Moguće je,
and perhaps even likely that
skoro sigurno,
the author here is referring to the Day of Atonement, which is still off in the future.
da autor govori ovde o danu pomirenja, koji je još uvijek dan budućnosti.
Another line of evidence that would lead to that same conclusion
Još jedan dokaz za ovo
are the next verses that follow.
su u stvari sljedeći stihovi koji slede.
And could I have you on the front row here read verses, what's your name? Dula. Okay, read verses 26 to 28.
26. do 28. stiha.
Dula. Chapter 10.
Jer kad mi grešimo navolice, pošto smo primili poznanje istine, nema više žrtve za grijehe, nego strašno čekanje suda i revnost ognja koji će da pojede one koji se suprote. Ko prestupi zakon Mojsijev bez milosti umire, kod 2 ili 3 svedoka, do koliko?
28.
Dobro je. Okay.
All right, here it describes a judgment. Is the judgment from the perspective of the author, is it past, present, or future?
S aspekta autora, da li je ovo prošlo, sadašnja, budućnost? Presence, they say.
From the author's perspective, this eschatological judgment, has it already come or is it
Da li je
yet
da je
to come?
eskatološki sud došao ili?
They're waiting for it, right?
Čeka ga, kaže.
Eager expectation of something that's going to come.
Očekivanje nečeg što će doći.
So it's he's referring to the judgment that happened under Moses' time.
On podrazumeva, spominje sud u Mojsijevo vreme.
That was past.
To je prošlost.
But he sees that as a type of the future judgment that is still to come.
Ali to vidi kao tip budućeg suda.
Now, what kind of judgment is this that he's describing?
Kakav je to sud?
The fiery indignation which will devour the adversaries.
Oganj koji će pojesti one koji se suprote.
Executive judgment?
Izvršni sud?
Yes.
Da.
But what else?
Ali šta još?
The end of verse 28.
Kraj 28. stiha.
The testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses.
Svedočanstvo 2, 3 svedoka.
What kind of judgment is that?
Kakav je to sud? Investigative.
Investigative, exactly.
Tačno, to je
We have the legal trial happening here.
Imate proces, istražni proces.
And then the verdict and then the
I
sentence.
onda osuda i onda kazna.
So Hebrews teaches very clearly a
Jevrejima uči
future
jasno
judgment
da je to budući sud
which has an investigative and an executive phase.
koji ima istražnu i izvršnu
And
fazu.
the last question is, who is going to be judged?
A posljednje pitanje je kome će se ovdje suditi?
Desmond Ford says, God's people are never judged after they
Ford
accept
kaže
Jesus.
nikad se Božjem narodu ne sudi.
But read verse 30.
Ali pogledajte 30. stih.
For we know him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.
Jer znamo ono koji reče moja osveta, ja ću vratiti,
And
govori
again,
Gospod.
the Lord will judge who?
Gospod će suditi kome?
His people.
Narodu svojem.
The professed people of God.
Oni koji ispovedaju njegovo ime.
And so I find in Hebrews the exact same message as we as Seventh-day Adventists are giving.
I ja u Jevrejima vidim tačnu poruku kao adventisti što imaju.
From the perspective of the first century, the judgment was still in the future.
Prvi vek, budućnost je sud. Sud je još uvijek budućnost.
The day, Yom Kippur, was still off in the future.
Dan sa velikim D, Jom Kipur, još uvijek je budućnost.
And it would involve an investigative and an executive judgment of
A
God's
to će
people.
biti istražna izvršna faza suda nad Božjim narodom.
Now I have to say just one more thing,
Još jednu stvar da kažem samo.
and that is there's one part of the Day of Atonement that did happen in the first century.
A postoji jedan deo dana pomirenja koji se ispuni u prvom veku.
and that was the sacrificial part.
A to je onaj žrtveni deo.
Because Jesus didn't die in 1844.
Jer Isus nije umro 1864.
And so the sacrifice of the Day of Atonement
Žrtva dana pomirenja
happened in the first century.
je iz prvog veka.
The sacrifice of the Pentecost happened in the first century.
Žrtva za pedesetnicu praznik je isto.
The sacrifice of the Feast of Tabernacles happened in the
Žrtva
first
za
century.
praznik senica isto je prineta na krst.
And Paul makes clear why that is.
I Pavle objašnjava zašto je to tako.
He quotes from Psalm 40,
On citira 40. psalam,
where the Messiah predicted that all the sacrifices would funnel down into the one sacrifice of himself.
gde je Isus kazao da će sve žrtve biti fokusirane na jednu njegovu žrtvu.
So the sacrificial part of all of the festivals fell on Jesus
Žrtveni sistem se ispunio u Isusu,
at the cross.
na krstu.
But the other parts of the festivals
Ali drugi delovi praznika
unfolded throughout salvation history.
se odvijaju u planu istorije spasenja.
He died at Passover time.
Umro je na pashalno vreme,
The Holy Spirit was poured out at Pentecost.
Duh Sveti je izliven na pedesetnicu,
Feast of Trumpets was the call to judgment,
poziv na sud, praznik truba
and the Day of Atonement starts in
i
1844,
dan pomirenja 1844.
and the Feast of Tabernacles is still future.
I praznik senica u budućnosti.
Okay, that's the basic picture that I wanted to present this
To
morning.
je važna slika za ovo jutro, sam hteo to da vam objasnim.
Maybe a couple more some questions now. We'll
Možda
have
još
till
nekih
1.
pitanja ako ima? In Hebrews 10:27 we have allusion to the executive judgment.
Yes,
A 28. istražni sud.
28th investigative judgment.
that's right.
Zašto malo okrenuti redosled?
Yeah.
Why is this reversed?
Yes.
In reversed order.
Hebrews is showing us that both of these judgments are in the future.
Jevrejima pokazuju da su oba suda u budućnosti.
And he presents them as one package.
Kao jedan paket.
Executive,
Is-
which then
Izvršni,
comes as a result of an investigation.
koji je rezultat nekakve istrage.
So he gives the result first and then he gives the cause.
Tako da daje rezultat pa uzrok.
But Hebrews is not trying to give us a detailed picture of last day events.
Ali Jevrejima ne daje detaljnu sliku posljednjih događaja.
It shows us the judgment is in the future.
Kaže sud u
It
budućnosti,
shows us the two phases of the judgment.
dve faze prikazuje,
And it's only logical you have to have the investigative one before you can have the executive one.
a logično je da morate prvo istragu da vršite pa onda izvršni sud.
But you can't find the date of 1844 in Hebrews.
Ali ne možete naći datum 1864 u Jevrejima.
Hebrews is focusing upon Christ's sacrifice
Jevrejima se fokusiraju na žrtvu
and
Hristovu
his entry into his high priestly ministry
i
in the first
ulaz u
century.
svešteničku službu u svetinji.
He's clear, judgment is still in the future,
Jasno je, budućnost je sud je stvar
but he
budućnosti,
doesn't go into detail about
ali
it.
ne ide u detalje.
There we need to go to Daniel
Zato idemo u
and
Danijela
Revelation.
i otkrivenje.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Još nešto postoji?
We will come back to this, and you may
Vratit
want to have
ćemo
more
se
questions tomorrow on
Na ovo,
this.
ako bude sutra više pitanja,
But you can chew on it, munch on this for the rest of the day.
možete
and
da žvaćete
maybe
ovo
there's a
sad
couple more questions now.
ostatak dana.
Da li sam ja dobro primijetila da
Did I notice well that
da Jevrejima poslanica govori o Hristu kao poglavaru svešteničkom, a ne kao svešteniku?
Hebrews speak about Christ as a high priest, not as ordinary priest?
True.
Ima veze, da li to uopšte može da ukazuje na tu službu,
Can that be a proof
znači službu dana očišćenja? Zbog toga je poglavar sveštenički.
is that in connection with his Yom Kippur service, that he is high priest?
Yes, this is a very good question.
Dobro je to pitanje.
And the point I want to emphasize is that the high priest did not only serve at Day of Atonement.
Poenta koju sam ja istakao je da prvo sveštenik, poglavar,
The high priest-
nije samo služio na dan pomirenja.
The high priest could function anytime.
Svakog dana može da služi.
So which part of the high priestly functioning is this emphasizing?
Šta ovde naglašava? Koji deo prvosvešteničke službe?
I find it interesting that when the epistle compares the high priestly work to the Old Testament,
Našao sam nešto interesantno kad poslanica upoređuje prvosvešteničku službu sa Starim Zavetom.
it is to the daily work of the high priest.
To je dnevna služba.
Very interesting.
Zanimljivo je to.
A couple of texts.
Nekoliko tekstova.
Hebrews 10,
Jevrejima 10,
verses 11 to 14.
11 do 14.
And every priest stands ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices.
I svaki sveštenik koji svaki dan kod nas stoji,
Here it's,
služeći jedne žrtve mnogo puta,
here's comparison with the daily priestly ministry.
dnevna je dakle žrtva.
But he says, but this man, after he had offered one sacrifice, sat down at the right hand of God.
A on prinesavši jednu žrtvu za grehe sede s desne strane
And
Boga.
verse 14, by for one offering he has perfected forever.
Jednim prinosom savršio vavek one koji bivaju osvećeni.
And then look at
14.
Hebrews 13,
A onda 13. glava,
verses 10 to 12.
10 do 12.
I think this is the right text. Is this the right one? Let's see. We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. Yes.
Da.
Uh,
10 je dakle stih.
not sure that's the. I think there's one other one that is better than that one that I was thinking of. Let me check one more text here. 7:25. Yes, here it's 7:25 to 27.
U stvari to je 7, 25 do 27.
And notice we read verse 25.
25 smo
Now
čitali,
let's read verses 28 and 20. Verses 26, 27.
26, 27.
For such a high priest was fitting for us,
Jer takava nama trebaše poglavar
who
sveštenik.
is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has
Svet,
become
vezan
higher
za
than the
čist,
heavens.
Odvojen od grešnika koji je bio više nebesa.
Let's talk about the high priest now, right?
To je prvo sveštenik.
Now, verse 27.
27.
Who does not need daily as those high priests.
Kojemu nije potrebno svaki dan.
Again, it's the daily service
je
of the high
dnevna.
priest to offer up sacrifices first to his own sins and then for the people's.
Najpre za greh i svoje žrtve, a potom za narod.
Again, the emphasis upon the daily service.
Naglasak na dnevnoj službi.
Now, we do have, as I said earlier, we do have some mention of the Day of Atonement with regard to the sacrifices.
Rekoh ranije da imamo spominjanje dana pomirenja u odnosu na žrtvu.
We have, for example, in Hebrews 9
Jevrejima 9
and verse 25.
25. stih.
Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the sanctuary every year with the blood of another.
Niti da mnogo puta prinosi sebe kao što poglavar sveštenički ulazi u svetinju svake godine.
But verse 26, but now once at the end of the year he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself.
Jednom na svršetku veka javi se da svojom žrtvom satre greh.
The author is arguing that all of the sacrifices of the Old Testament don't have any efficacy on themselves.
Starozavetne žrtve, autor kaže, nemaju sami sebi, nisu efektivne.
The people that he's writing to are tempted to go back into Judaism.
Ljudi kojima piše su iskušeni da se vrate u
And he's
judaizam.
saying, don't forsake Jesus.
Ne odbacite Isusa, kažem.
If you go back into Judaism, there is no sacrifice for sin that really
Jer ako
forgives
odete u
you.
judaizam, ne ima žrtve za grehe koja vam može pomoći.
In fact, he says, even the sacrifice of the Day of Atonement, even the high point of the sacrificial year, is not enough to forgive sin.
Čak i žrtva na dan pomirenja, autor kaže, nije, kao najveća žrtva, nije dovoljna da oprosti greh.
So when he compares the sacrifices, yes, he compares the sacrifice of the high priest in the earthly time to the high priest that Jesus gave.
Dakle, on u stvari upoređuje žrtvu iz prvosvešteničkog vremena Isusovu.
Because as we already said, all of the sacrifices coalesce down into the one sacrifice.
Jer smo
of
već
Jesus.
rekli, sve žrtve se pronalaze ispunjenje u Isusove žrtve.
This is the way I see it.
Tako to ja vidim.
All right, it's 1 o'clock,
1 je sat,
and we're hungry.
gladni smo.
And I wish you a good physical meal, and also I invite you to chew on your spiritual food until tomorrow.
Želim vam prijatnu fizičku hranu, ali žvaćite i ovu duhovnu do sutra.